This is my review of the Rocket Rhino Racetail. This is a modern race deck, like a mini downhill deck, 8.5 inches wide, just about 30 inches long, with an 18.5 to 21.5 inch wheelbase. This is definitely the smallest board I've ever owned, the smallest board that I've skated for a consistent amount of time. And it took a while to get used to. I'm a pretty big guy at 6'7", but I have kind of taught myself to kind of take up a small stance and be able to ride boards like this. So yeah, we're gonna get in depth about this. Now, the big feature on this board, the big cool thing, as you can already see, is this built-in like torque block. What they do, and it's really clever the way that they do it, they transition the like normal Canadian maple laminate. Is this Canadian maple? Yeah. This is the construction is carbon fiber, fiberglass. It's got an ABS top sheet in there. I have notes and I have notes. So if you see me looking off to the side, I'm referencing my notes. But they transition the 8-ply maple laminate, I think it's 8-ply, into a full like 13-ply or something like that, simulating a torque block. Now, a torque block is usually something, an aftermarket modification that you would glue or Velcro down onto your board to give you kind of an elevated banked surface to push your foot against during various maneuvers. And the cool thing about doing it this way is that it's it's part of the board. It is a direct connection. Oftentimes torque blocks are foam or urethane or some other kind of like soft material that you have to form to your board. And the plus side of that is that they're comfortable and can like conform to the existing concave of the board. The downside is that a soft torque block means that, some of the inputs that you're putting into the board are dampened or lessened. And doing it this way, by actually making the board stick up like that, means that you've got a solid connection down into the trucks, into the wheels, and you can be sure that you're not losing any of your inputs into the compression of the torque block itself. Let's talk about some just like facts of this board. One thing that I noticed is that this board has a surprising amount of rocker. It's not the most rocker I've ever felt, but I usually am not skating boards with rockers. So when I have a board that has rocker, it's a little surprising. And, it's hard to see because I think our eyes are drawn to kind of the steeper curvature here. But something that I really noticed riding this board is it feels like the front of the board kind of scoops up, like spoons up, which was, something I had to get used to. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of rocker. I'm not against it by any means. But yeah, and you can modify that by kind of playing with the ride height. I always talk about this. When you have a board with any amount of rocker, changing the ride height changes where the bottom of that rocker is. So if you're raising up the back, then the kind of like low point of the hammock that is rocker will be under the front foot, which is interesting. Something that this like built-in torque block does is it artificially like raises the ride height or the like felt ride height of the board. One thing you can do to, of course, kind of minimize that or negate that is to use a lower ride height in the back truck and maybe a small wedge in the front truck, just so that when your feet are actually down on the board in the position that you would use them, they're actually about the same height. Some people are not going to like that. Some people like to have that back foot slightly elevated. And some people are going to stand too far in front of this torque block thingy to actually have their stance elevated by it, so it won't make a difference. But it is something interesting. This board is really small. No surprise. I mean, if you've read the specs, you know. If you listen to the specs that I said at the top of this, you would know. I thought that this was just a Rhino with a torque block in it, and I was wrong. This is about 1/4 inch narrower, over 1/4 inch narrower than the original Rhino. It's a little bit shorter. This has smaller wheelbases available than the original Rhino, and so I thought I was getting a Rhino with a torque block in it, but really I got a smaller Rhino. This is a very different board in a lot of ways. That also means that I can't free ride it. I can't free ride boards below 9 inches wide. It just changes the way that I leverage my stand-up heel side slides. I can do stand-up toes on narrow boards, but stand-up heel sides stop working for me with a board that is smaller than 9 inches. If you're already comfortable on a board of this size, for free ride, I think it's actually a pretty cool option for free riding. I really like the pocket that you get back here for your toe. You can see where my toe kind of falls, where I'm able to kind of stand up on the board in this area. I've put down some pieces of locked on that just stick up above the dark matter grip tape, just to kind of enhance the board feel and the traction in that area. Let's talk about things that I liked about the board, some of my pros. I think the torque block curvature is really natural. I think it's really comfortable, really ergonomic, and I think it's going to work for a lot of people. This board garners a lot of attention at events. I brought it to a number of events. People are always very interested in the tail and feeling it, and the feedback, the response has been extremely positive by everybody. It seems like this tail is just subtle enough that it doesn't tell your foot exactly where to go or bind you into any certain position. You still get, an inch forwards or backwards of adjustability to work with your stance. But it's also not so subtle that it doesn't do anything. It actually does make a difference in a way that I really like. I really like the mounting options that this board has. It's got plenty of them. Like I said, 8.5 to 21.5 inches. The secondary benefit of having multiple mounting options, other than being able to change how much weight you have on your front foot versus your back foot, or I should say, how much weight you have on your front truck versus your back truck without changing your stance or standing position on the board. It also gives you a number of places to put your foot stop. This is a foot stop of my own design. I just call it the bone. If you're interested in getting your hands on this, stick around to the end of the video, check out my Patreon. I'll talk about it more at the end. By the way, this board was purchased with funds from Patreon. The patrons voted on this board in a poll, and we accumulated the funds to buy it, and here it is. So now I'm going to sell it back to the patrons at a great discounted price, and then be able to reinvest that money into future gear reviews, which is really exciting and cool, because the Patreon allows me to buy and review gear that I otherwise would not be able to buy or review. Take me out of my comfort zone a little and be able to afford some cool new things. So check out the Patreon. There's fun little rewards over there, and I post a ton of content over there. But yes, mounting options, ton of them, means that you can find a good spot for your foot stop. Means you can find a good spot for your trucks to feel how they interact with your feet. I guess I'm not talking about it. This is a toe wedge, similar to a torque block, but for the front foot. I find this helps me out most when I'm skating grippy wheels, like race wheels that are pretty fresh, or on chunder or things like that, where in heel side slides, my foot would want to slide off of the board under high resistance as I'm hitting uneven terrain and things like that, kind of being jumped around on my board. This kind of stops it dead in its tracks, and this is a modification I really like. I've had to add it there because this board is in that category of modern race board where the concave is extremely subtle, and if you want any serious interaction with the concave of the board, you have to build it yourself. That's fine. It is what it is. Everybody that's got a mini board these days is DIYing the hell out of it, so I'm not terribly surprised. This board does have W. It's virtually non-existent. I really am not feeling it. And it just disappears into the tail of the board. So I guess it creates a bit of a pocket there, but I couldn't tell you. I don't know. And this W is just too subtle to be really meaningful or useful. Maybe it has a subtle effect on the way the board feels and handles and the way it keeps my foot in place, but every feature on this board is just so minute. Except for the rocker. I feel like the rocker is kind of the biggest concave feature aside from the torque block tail. The rocker is the one thing that I do kind of notice and had to adjust to a bit. This board, plenty stiff with its fiberglass carbon fiber and its, traditional Canadian maple laminate. But one thing I noticed is that this board feels less dense than other boards. It just feels lighter. I don't know if that's just me. You know, it could just be that the board is small and I'm like, whoa, small board, it's lightweight. I feel like maybe it's the epoxy that Rocket is using, maybe it's the wood itself. It is just a lower density than other boards that I've felt that are around this size. And so for that reason, I think this board is actually a decent candidate if you're trying to put a weight on your board. If that's something you're interested in, weights can kind of smooth out kickouts and hookups in slides, kind of dampen the movements of your board and make it just a little bit more predictable for sliding, free riding, things like that. And this board is extremely lightweight, extremely small, which means that it's probably a good candidate for a weight if that's your thing. When I'm in race mode, I prefer to have no weight at all. I really don't skate with a weight on any of my setups. Yeah, maybe something to unpack another time. Maybe I'll get into weights this year. I do have the Shangang gold brick weight that I've been starting to mess with. So I don't know, maybe I'll be a weight skater soon. I think this board's a good candidate for some weight because it is super lightweight. Not only its size, but I think that the board itself seems like it's just a low density material. I don't know. Now some downsides, some cons. I'm looking around my room, see if I have a prop here. Nope, and that's fine. One of the cons is that I think the tail ends too early. A couple things. I wish it were an inch or 2 inches longer, and I wish it didn't round off so much, like there's less taper. I wish it was a little bit more squared. And that's because of a very specific foot position that I'm using when I'm going heel side and trying to maintain a tuck, when I'm tuck leaning. So I've already shared that this is where my toes go, the ball of my foot goes here. When I want to drop into a heel side tuck lean, a technique you'll see a lot of riders do is they will kind of make their heel fall over so it can press on the opposite side of the board, or at least lay flat on the board, so that the leverage is not counteracting the front foot, the front heel that's getting a lot of the leverage for steering down. This board is so narrow and the tail is so short, and this position where I want to stand in the torque block is far enough back that when I drop into that heel side tuck lean, my heel falls off the edge of the board. I wear a size 12 shoe when I'm skating, 13 when I'm not skating, just because I like to squeeze into a little shoe for a tighter fit. And I find that my heel is nowhere near this back corner of the board when I'm dropping it down into a tuck lean. It's kind of like, imagine it's where my wrist is. It's really hanging off the board and I'm missing out on a lot of opportunities for leverage. I really felt that most at Maryhill, where tuck leaning is a major part of the technique that you need in order to be fast at Maryhill. I just felt like consistently I had issues getting the proper leverage with my back foot to assist in the tuck lean in some of the tighter turns. So yeah, I would have liked to see this tail be a little bit longer and a little bit bigger. One thing you'll notice is that the curve of the board kind of goes up and then it flattens out. That's not just a visual trick. The board is actually like that. The torque block goes up and then levels off. That's fine. The board, if it were to be extended, I don't even need the tail to keep going up. I think this height is fine. I just need it to be this like flat, thick platform for just a little bit longer. And then I think I'd be a little bit more comfortable on this thing. Again, that could be a function of my shoe size. It could be a function of me having too big of a stance for this board. Again, this is a pretty small board. Did mess around with my stance. I messed around with my front foot position to give myself a little more real estate. And I did notice that if I stand further in front of the torque block, then I could start to set my heel down on the outer rail and get that pressure for my heel side turning. But now the ball of my foot is not in this nice little pocket created by the torque block, which is what feels really good for tucking, feels really good for toe side cornering and toe side sliding. And that's how I am using the board most of the time. And it's the niche situation where I want a heels head tuck lean that I feel like there's just not enough space back there. So yeah, I like this board a lot. It's great. But yeah, that is a small little problem I have. Another problem, we'll address it quickly. The flush mounts are just too shallow, or not shallow enough. I just wish that the flush mounts were deeper. You can see the back one is like almost non-existent. It's just barely there. It almost looks like a mistake. And the front one is a little bit deeper, but still we're looking at like a 1/16 of an inch or just a few millimeters deep. I like to experiment with ride height. I like to experiment with wedges on my setup, angling my trucks, and flush mounts can really help reduce the ride height burden of messing around with your angles. One of the downsides to wedging is that if you're not using a super minimalistic wedged riser, or if you're using a really high angle, you can add a lot of artificial ride height, which isn't always good for the performance or the feeling of your board, in my opinion. I prefer to have a low ride height whenever possible. I'm not super worried about wheel bite. Flush mounts are a great way to assist in lowering the ride height so you can have more of a range of experimentation with that in your different trucks. And this board's flush mounts just are not deep enough. They really are doing what a flush mount is meant to do, I guess, which is give the trucks a flat and level place to mount on the board so that the angles are consistent and so that they've got good contact with the board. This is what the flush mounts do on this board. I like the secondary use and utility of flush mounts, which is lowering the ride height. I think there's a lot of value in having a board like that. So yeah, again, it's not terrible. It's not like this is a super thick board where I need that ride height back because the board is so thick that it's raising it up artificially. But yeah, just a small complaint. But that's all I've got to say about the Rocket Rhino Racetail. Again, thank you to all the patrons who support the channel, support me on Patreon. I've got a bunch of videos over there that I hope you all are enjoying. I post a lot on Patreon. I've probably got upwards of 9 hours of content on Patreon alone, and other ways to interact with me over there. Check out my Instagram as well. Sometimes you can get little sneak peeks of what I'm reviewing, what I'm working on, quick little opinions, where I'm traveling to, at Owen Campbell 777 on Instagram. And let me know if you would consider picking up the Rocket Rhino Racetail, or are you the kind of person that would just get a normal Rocket Rhino, or the more exotic Rocket Rhino Kicktail. That seems like a pretty interesting board. Might suit me pretty well, but who can say? All I can say is that this has been a pretty nice first experience with Rocket boards. I'm a fan of the product. I've beat this thing to hell, and it's durable. It's holding up well. I've had a number of crashes on this board, crashes and thrashes, and it's doing just fine. I guess something I forgot to talk about. These holes are kind of countersunk. They're deeper, so you don't have to have longer hardware when you're using this board. A nice little quality of life feature, and it seems like Rocket does put a lot of thought into their board. So I like to see their innovation. I like what they're doing. I think this idea is great, and it just didn't come together in a way that worked perfectly for me, but it has a lot of potential for future boards, future iterations, or even customization. Maybe. I know Rocket does some customization services, but yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day.